Press the red button. Share my screen with the computer sound. It is an absolute delight to have Len Ballantine with us. Thank you, sir, for coming on and joining this collection. Your credentials and your CV speaks for itself, but I'd like to know, where did it all start?
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be a part of this great series you've got going. For me, writing music started almost as I began piano. My father taught me. My hands were too small. No normal teacher wanted to give lessons. So at age 4, my father taught me. And by age 6, I was coming up with little bits of stuff of my own. And my father had a notebook, and he scribed my little piano pieces. And you know what? If you're 6 years old and you're writing music, it really is things that you've heard, right? It's a snatch of a melody. It kind of sounded a little like Beethoven and a little like Schubert, and little things that I could do with 2 hands. And that's when it started. I don't know, it was a desire or just the capacity to imagine and to hunt until I found the right fingers to put on the sounds that I wanted. Yeah, very early.
So, do you come from a musical family? Are you from a Salvation Army family, or is it something that just came into you as a child?
No, absolutely a 4th generation Salvationist.
Ooh,
In fact, on both sides of the family, my mother's family came from High Wycombe, and they opened
lovely place.
a bakery in Stratford, Ontario, and that was 1924. So the history goes back a long way. My father was a cornet soloist, bandmaster, a very capable musician. It wasn't until later that he actually received musical education, but he was what you would call a really solid army musician. My mother was a soloist in her own right, a contralto soloist. So our home was full of music. Sunday nights after the meeting, my sister and I and my parents would sing around the piano, and that's when I think I learned more about sight reading from going through the songbook and trying to play all the rhythms and the keys that were there. Long history.
Yeah. Did you, I think people like Jim Kerner said that they didn't even realize what they were doing with things like counterpoint and harmonization. They only learned that they were official sort of musical terms for what they were doing. They were just, I just done it on the score in the paper. I didn't realize that was that the same with you? Did you, when you were developing your craft, but I've been doing that for years. I never realized that was an official term kind of thing.
No, I had a very serious music education right from grassroots, and knew music grammar and music harmony and whatnot from a very early age. Not early enough to save me from some pain at music camp, though, because I could play the piano. So I went to music camp, and I was in the C band, but I was in the harmony class, and I couldn't take all the rules. Harmony was in those days was taught. This is the progression, and you could only double the third and double the root here, and it was all too kind of mathematical. I like to work with my ears, and I didn't do too well at it.
Yeah,
but,
I can see why. Yeah.
Very quick, at 10 years old, what can you do? But going forward, I did a lot of counterpoint, a lot of harmony, and of course at university, the analysis where you study other people's work until you know what makes music what it is.
Yeah. When was the first time can you remember, I should say, the first time outside of a family kind of situation where music that you'd written yourself got played by people outside the family, and they're kind of, there's a Ballantine gene here, I like this, and it was kind of outside of just amusing the family, the sing-song kind of thing? Can you remember that?
In terms of writing down music and passing it out and having it played, I can remember that.
Hmm.
I can remember after a Sunday morning meeting asking the band at Windsor Citadel to stay behind and play some music that I had written. And they stood around the band room in front of their lockers and put the music in their lyres. And we we played my little piece. I think I was 14 or 15, and it was horrible. I mean, it was awful. I mean, the tuning and there were mistakes on the page, and I had copied it wrong, and it was. I just about never went back to it. It
Oh,
was that kind of disappointing. Um, but I mean, I wasn't writing a lot down. I was busy playing the piano
yeah.
until I got to university. I wrote very little before I got to that stage. And then, of course, when you get to higher education, then you're having to write what the teachers
Mm,
want you to write. And I had to do a lot of crazy um, atonal stuff and experimental music to get a degree. And my heart was in a triad. How do you come from the world of triads and have to adapt to atonal music? But I did my best for the school. Um, but I didn't do a lot of writing in my teens. Some. A march called Fond de Neige. My sister was on a missions trip to Haiti, and she brought back a chorus called On y va, marchons on y va, and I put that in my little Fond de Neige march,
okay.
and that was probably the first thing that I've still got in my drawer, in my file. Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty in there that's waiting to see the light of day. Just out of curiosity, obviously you were studying. You say you were studying music and composition in higher education. So, what was the plan for the life? Because was it a case of university and then going to Salvation Army officership? Because you obviously had the call and you had to answer that, and that's a whole different set of things. So, what happened in between? What were you
Oh,
going
there's
to
no
train to
plan.
be?
If anybody tells you they got a plan for their life, they're crazy. There's no plans.
Yeah,
You
to
grow up.
put
I
into
mean, if you asked me at 6 years old what I wanted to be, I probably would have said a plastic surgeon. At 15, I would have said a concert pianist. And then when I got to university and I was in a performance piano program, I was in it for 3 days. And I knew that I was never going to play
Mhm.
piano that well. I couldn't stand the discipline. My head wasn't. You have to be a machine to be that kind of an artist. So I literally got out of the program and into a common first year. I kept the teacher that they had assigned me because I had some scholarship money that I had to use up, and but that gave me the opportunity to get into composition. And to be in that program, I had to have an ensemble credit. So rather than play my euphonium, I sang, and that changed my life.
Mhm.
Singing in the concert choir at the University of Toronto changed my life because I was looking at a guy who motivated a whole room full of people.
Yeah.
Sure, they were good musicians, but I saw what happened when an artist approached singing intelligently and drew pictures and drew energy out of people, and that changed my life. So between the piano and the choral and then the composition training, I was on a track, and I couldn't have prophesied what that was.
Yeah.
I remember I had a teacher who was assigned to me for a your staff advisor, and he was a composer because I was in the composition program, and he had big, huge, bulbous ears, and they were kind of hairy ears, and he smoked a pipe, and he said, "Well, what do you want to do when you're through with this place?" And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, I think I want to be a Salvation Army officer." And he had a lungful of smoke, and he blew it out at me and laughed in my face uproariously. And I guess the calling for officership was always a part of my life, a part of my awareness. And where I was going musically, I had no idea, but I knew it had something to do with creativity. My skills with the piano has always held me in good stead. And the rest has just kind of
Yeah.
gone forward from there.
I mean, I'm looking at your CV, and obviously we have a mutual friend in Donna who speaks in glowing terms and quite rightly. I think I'm not wishing to discredit any other Salvation Army composer, and it's not the me to this, but you're one of the few composers who seems to me to be quite happy to do the vocal as well as the brass. Whereas some composers can quite easily do a lot of brass, or they're very at home doing vocal. You seem to have crossed that bridge quite effectively. You're equally at home with vocal, because I looked at some of the vocal pieces and I was shocked that that's one of Lenz. I remember singing that in a singing company and thinking, you know, I really, Stories of Jesus, Celebration Morning, yeah, Moment by Moment, We Have a Mission. They've got some energy and vitality. And I was just, you know, I was listening to Moment by Moment and it just doesn't let go. And it's just kind of got that solid ground to it and that wonderful love. But it reminded me very much of a comment I said to Barry Gott, where I said, do you know what? I think when you came in, you threw the rule book out the window and said, this is me, this is my gift, this is how I write. And I think I'll put you in the same field, that you've got a very melodic, rainbowy kind of talent, and it's so present. I mean, I look at your first thing, 1978 was A Brighter Way. I think I've heard that, but Sweet By and By, Adrian's Praise, Brazil 75, Go Down Moses in both, you know, journal and vocal. Do you prefer either medium? Are you happy doing the vocal, or if someone says I want a solo or a throwaway piece for brass, does that not bother you?
I don't really think about it. I don't have a preference. I think I've been drawn to the vocal because I've been involved in choral directing. And if you're a choral director and an arranger, composer, you want to write for the group. So I've written a lot of vocal music in my life. But my peers, people the Bill Himes, Stephen Bulla, these people in North America, they were writing primarily for brass, and there's every Salvationist bandsman wants to write for brass, and they can write for vocal too, but they invested heavily in the brass, and um, I I think I chose rather specifically to engage myself with vocal writing, and it's because I'm so lazy. You know, a song is a short form. I'm not
You and
involved
lazy in the same
in
sentence.
big, huge things that I've only recently come to using Sibelius. I was a pencil and paper guy and copying it out by hand, and my wife really decided to hide the pencil and force me to use the computer and get to use it. And I enjoy that now, but I try to stay away from it as much as I can, because if you go to the computer, you can spend a lot of time finessing and making it look right. Then you make one move and the whole thing blows up. You know, it changes all
Yeah.
where everything's sitting. So I try to only go there when I've got something to input.
Mm.
But the computer is a wonderful boon. Nobody can complain about my manuscript anymore, although they didn't complain a lot when I was doing it by hand. But it's a long journey to go from pencil to Sibelius and feel happy about the result.
So when you were sort of composing and you were getting, you were sending stuff in and they were saying, you know, send that into the music headquarters, we think it's quite good. Did you have the benefit of any sort of Salvationist mentors who sort of sat down with you and thought, hey, that's interesting, why don't you try this? And you know, you kind of gobsmacked that such a legendary figure would be interested in your music. Are there any particular names that spring to mind?
Absolutely. Well, I worked for and worked with Robert Redhead in my life here in Canada. He came to the music department in about 1960, 70, 78, something like that.
Yeah.
uh, and he was a great encouragement to me. And because I saw him working and I worked with him, it's not as if we sat down at the same table and he told me what he did, but I saw what he did and I heard what he did,
Mhm.
and I loved his orchestral work, his orchestral colors, and what he got out of the band, and the way he put his spiritual self into his relationships with his band's people and into the music that he wrote. He was a great influence, and really, it was, I think, mostly on Robert's recommendation that I was able to come to England when I did,
Mhm.
uh, and fulfill the role with the ISS, and then I worked alongside of him when he was the music secretary,
Mhm.
and then when he went back to Canada, Trevor became the music secretary, and I worked with Trevor, and Trevor was another great influence on me.
Trevor. Trevor who?
Trevor Davis.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. I just wanted to
yeah,
double check. Yeah.
yeah.
Lovely
You've got
man. Yeah.
got
Lovely
a,
man.
a few Trevors.
Yeah. There's a few Trevors in the army, but not many at music headquarters. So I had a feeling it might be, but I didn't want to get it wrong. But yeah, it's very interesting because obviously talking to people like Nicholas Samuels, Nick Simmons Smiths, and so forth, who've gone the other way. So you had that Canadian background, you've grown up with music all around you. You know, when you were asked to come to the UK and you had to start leading music, did you notice any cultural differences the other way around from a
Oh,
musical
yes,
point of
of
view?
course. Yes, big time. But it was a wonderful thing to experience, and my family was young enough that we just absorbed everything that there was about being in England during that time. My son was 7 months old, and my daughter was 4 years old when we first came, and we stayed for 6 years. So during that time, it was a very rich life. The difference in the Salvation Army, I think, was the biggest cultural difference for us.
Hmm.
Uh, um, and of course, traveling not only with the ISS but in my job all over the territory, the British territory, I got to see everything and all the different kinds of expression and the depth of the tradition.
Hmm.
Things like Butlins. I mean, we don't have anything to compare with Butlins. And I kept hearing, around the coffee clutch in the morning, I'd hear about Butlins, and I'd say, "What are they talking about?" And then I went to Butlins, and I knew what a
I come across
marvelous
you had Norman
community.
Bearcroft in Canada. I mean, how do you escape a legend like Bearcroft?
Well, that's it. Yeah, we tried our best to make a Canadian out of him, but that was a tough one. That was a tough one.
Yeah, it's
I think.
yeah, yeah, it's just very interesting to see what you say about because it's been so interesting to see the other way around. It's, hang on, but we don't that tune to that song, never done that before. And obviously, you probably had the reverse where the Canadian tunes would have come to you. And, oh, okay, that's not the most obvious one. So, and also because you're so ingrained with the music from a performance and a player, it's kind of, oh, okay, you're playing that, are you? And you kind of had to absorb it straight away. But so when you first came to Butlins, which for some people won't have a clue what it is, I've been to New Horizons and Butlins for many years. Salvation Army Holiday Week, everything goes. Um, I mean, you've done music camps in Canada and the States and so forth. There's that kind of freelancing, although there is a structure. But what took you surprised about Butlins?
Ah, what was the most charming part about Butlins was the evening program when people like Annie from Cambridge, Annie and
Now, Costa?
Jim, uh, Big Jim
Jim
from
Wright, Sheffield City Band.
yeah, Jim,
Yeah,
and they'd get on
Jim.
stage and they do these bizarre, crazy things, and
Yeah, I
and,
remember
and 2,000 people would be hollering there and just dying with the laughter, the improv that went on. And our daughter, Catherine, began her love of the stage right on the Butlin stage, song and dance. She was part of that troupe. And I think that was the biggest charmer for us.
Sadly, no longer with us. But
Yeah, I think the people that chose to go to Butlins, as opposed to would never go to Butlins, kind of told the story too. I mean, you say you were in the Butlins band.
I
I
was
mean,
in the
that
Butlins band for a couple of
that
years.
was a marvelous thing, come one, come all, and play in the Butlins band. Yeah, no, it was great fun. Great fun.
I don't know whether you were bandmaster at the time. I was too young. My bandmaster had turned up, and he had brought his kit with him, and I don't think we realised that we were both going to the Army Week. And he said, Morven, he said, have you got a drum with you? I said, no. He said, get with me. So I'll have a word with the bandmaster. And we played a practice, and Ray Bowes came in, and we played Harlesden. I had no idea who he was. I'd never met him before. And there was this buzz from the people in the back. Hey, it's Ray Bowes. I was like, who is he? I don't know. And someone afterwards said, that's Ray Bowes. And because only later, I thought, oh my goodness, if only I'd had the chance. You met some incredible people in that, and you still do. But I'd like to ask you a little bit about some of your pieces. It was one of the privileges of having these conversations and learning the stories. One of the big things was hymn tune arrangements, of which you have done a lot. But one that really stood out is probably one of the most famous ones, I Know Thou Art Mine, a very almost sacred tune in the Salvation Army annals. How did you approach that as a hymn tune, knowing that it was so well loved and you didn't want to disrespect it as a hymn tune? You wanted to give it the full reverence. How do you approach that with a hymn tune?
I think that you've done a very good job in posing the question. I think you must know what the answer is. The tune itself has an arch, like a stained glass window. And there's an elegance about the tune. Although Commissioner Unsworth couldn't write his own music down, he had a scribe that would do that for him. But the words and the music, which go together so well, it's a great marriage. It was styled after Tom Rive, after I Know I Know a Fount.
Yeah.
And it was Bram Gregson, was a bandmaster at London Citadel in Ontario. He asked me for an arrangement, and he used to play the opening segment from I Know a Fount at his concerts. And he said, why don't you do something, something along that line? And so I went right through the tune book, as you do, right through the tune book, looking for a tune that had some kind of elegance and that hadn't been arranged to death, and that grabbed me. And I just lived with the tune and where it sat in with the lyric. At the end, there's a couplet at Featherstone's words, if ever I love thee, my Jesus, 'tis now. So that motif is throughout the whole thing, and especially at the very, very end. And the words just
Magic.
Are so well fitted. They're so well married. I just really tried to stay within what the words were saying, and the last verse gets to be triumphant, and I spread it out a little, sort of in a Bach chorale style way. And yeah. It got put in the drawer, though. It never got played, other than whatever Bram gave it. I put it in the drawer. I had a band at the time, and it wasn't right for them. And 7 years after I put it in the drawer, I was in England and had to go to Castleford for a weekend, and bandmaster there said, have you got anything you could bring? And I hadn't written anything, so I took that and passed it out. And just with that approach to playing, that British brass band right down the center of the tubes, and tuneful and sonorous and well balanced, it worked. So I went back on Monday morning and went into Steve Cobb's office and said, hey, you might want to try this. And yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I'm looking at your your list of brass compositions, I mean, and there's several. There's a couple of things I want to ask you about the vocal ones, but you seem to have this very kind of light style where you take almost like a Negro spiritual and give it a brass twist. I mean, Sweet By and By, Abraham's Praise. You even jazz up Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is sort of brave. But for me, I think the one that I always associate was probably the first one that I saw was Since Jesus, a lovely medley of different tunes. And it almost goes right through the alphabet of styles. Can you talk a little bit about what you remember about the genesis of Since Jesus and how the tunes got chosen? Was it a commission or I don't know. This is why I'm asking the guy.
I was in Britain at the time, and Brian Burdett with the Canadian Staff Band wanted a piece to go somewhere and asked me to think about writing something, and I found a few tunes that I thought worked together. And I needed to, that was way before computer, so I wanted to make sure that it was on the page correctly, and I took it along to Hendon band practice and passed it out. And I held the stick and told the cornets what to do on the opening figure there. 3 minutes later, we had it, and we played through the whole thing, and it worked. So, yeah, it was. I knew that Kevin, gracious, was on trombone. I knew I had a good trombone player that would enjoy a nice trombone solo in Amazing. Is it Amazing Grace?
It could be.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it since 2 o'clock this afternoon, so I spent most of the afternoon listening to Ballantine arrangements to get the feel back. But I kind of have to. You get some of these tunes that you know so well, and Sweet By and By. Abraham's Praise surprised me because I went back to it fresh, and it wasn't that kind of smack bang wallop that I kind of thought it was, and it really kind of refreshed me to think, hang on a minute, this is not in your face. It's kind of subtle, but it builds up, and it's still got a decent tune behind it, and you're not sort of mucking around with it to the extent of the fireworks are going off for the sake of it. It's a 4th of July. Well, you don't do 4th of July in Canada, but fireworks night kind of thing. But you're still treating it with a bit of decency and a bit of fun. I think that's a Ballantine motif is fun.
That tune is a sacred cow in Britain because of its use in is it Exodus? What is it?
Abraham.
So it was with fear and trepidation that we popped into swing mode, but I thought that by giving it that smoky kind of Mesopotamia 3,000 years ago feel at the beginning, and then using that as a bridge later in the piece, that we sort of ease into it. It's really supposed to show that the faith that we have is on a continuum from the days when God spoke out of the cloud into the hearts of the Israelites through the prophets in that dusty place. And then boom, here we are in the 20th century or the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And it's the same faith, it's the same God, and we still sing his praises and whatever the tune is. You know, it's intended to suggest that.
It's a lovely thing. Now, please, I don't mind being proved wrong on these things because I can only go on the information I'm given. I could only find one cornet solo under your name, My All I Bring, 1984. Now, have I missed one? Because I could only find that one. And you get some people, they write solos, as you say, you can write a trombone solo in a piece. But as a cornet solo on its own, that's the only one I could trace in the sort of few days I've had to do it.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, that's the only one. That was written for
Wow, interesting.
Arthur Dean, very, very lovely player, sweet sound, Canadian staff band on a recording many, many years ago when I had my first job with the music department in Canada. And there was a recording they did across Canada with many different groups representing the territory, and including the staff band had a few tracks, and Norman put that on. And that was the first piece that I could objectify and say, I like that bit, and I like that bit. That works. And so I I was happy that he all must have felt the same way, and that it was such a pleasant thing. So it was good for my desire to keep writing,
Hmm.
because composers don't like failure. When you hear something you've done and it's horrible, it really takes a long time to recover. So
I
you
can,
need all
I don't know. I
the
can't read.
yeah.
Composition is not something I've ever been able to do. I would love to have been able to do something, but it's God's plans for me to do elsewhere. So having to talk to the composers and sort of ask you these weird and wonderful stories is absolutely a blessing in itself. And to learn, listening to Sweet By and By and Since Jesus and things like Mid All the Traffic, yet another classic hymn tune that's just is. But I got to ask, because it's one of the most famous tunes out there, and Ray Steadman and done this magnificent work on it. Go Down Moses. Was it something you kind of thought, oh no? I mean, it's been used hundreds of times, and people have done. You've got the Ray Steadman Allens, you've got the Ken Downeys, you've got the Stephen Woods, have all done bigger and better. How did you approach Go Down, knowing that these wonderful versions exist? You were kind of, what could I bring fresh to it?
I guess you don't think about them, do you? You don't go to them and reference them and say, well, I'll do something different. You just plow ahead. In my case, the vocal came first. I wrote it for the ISS. It was a swing treatment, sort of. And then when I got back home to Canada, the CSB wanted something, and I just scored it. I literally just scored the vocal track and made it work for brass. There's nothing much about the structure of the thing that it was altered. So that's one case where it seemed to work, going right from the score, the vocal score, to the brass score.
I'd like you, if you can, please, to sort of give me a bit of history on this, because I remember this from my youth, which is 20, 30 years ago. Celebration Morning, where did that come from? Because I have a feeling that's a lot older than I think it is. But I know that the difference between composing and getting it published can be 30 years.
Yes, well, it might not have been quite that long, but it was in my first job at the headquarters. There was another young man working in our sister department, Special Efforts, next door. His name was Ian Adnams, and he was charged with getting some television programming together, so that at seasonal peaks, the Army could offer a half an hour of program to the stations at a period where there was kind of a dearth. And so we did several Christmas shows and a couple of Easter and Thanksgiving programs with our own people. And Celebration Morning came from that. It was an Easter program. He wrote the lyrics, and I wrote the tune. And at that time, it was so syncopated. That I didn't know that it was hard or that it was difficult. I just wrote it down. I wasn't trying to be clever, but it was very hard to teach at that moment. And gospel wasn't big. The chorus kind of goes into a gospel feel. But we did it. We recorded it in a studio, and then we went out and filmed it, sort of lip syncing to the tracks. And eventually I sent it in, and it's caught on. And now, thank you, dear. Oh, I have some coffee arriving.
Ooh!
Creme on the head here. Very nice. Thank you.
Could you send me over a glass of lemonade with some ice, please? It'll probably be melted by the time.
Very good.
I mean,
the other arrangement that came out of that same bit of programming was Joyful, Joyful.
Yes.
That eventually
I kind of avoided that because that was so sort of obvious.
1975, 76, 77, somewhere around in there. And then I scored it for brass band. It was originally just a pop group, a few singers and a backing. And that was on the Celebration Morning album. There was an album. We finally put together a few tracks from those various shows, and we called it Celebration Morning.
Yeah.
And I've been very surprised all over the world where there's Salvationists who love to collect these things and get to hear about them. I keep finding that record and another one I did with the New Life Singers back in the mid 70s, turning up. At the
Yeah.
time, I was wearing a red Lion Tamers jacket. My tunics at Earl's Court Band were a red Lion Tamer with frogs on it, dark black frogs.
Yeah. I haven't got my database in front of me. Stories of Jesus. Now, I've got to try and make sure I've got the right. There's so many different versions of this, and I'm hopefully thinking that the one I'm thinking of is your one, because it'd be incredibly embarrassing for me if it's not. So, tell me the stories of Jesus.
Yes,
I love to hear things like. Is
very
that
good.
yours?
But I didn't write it. I just arranged it.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
Jane Clark.
Jacqueline, who
Jane,
I'd love to know what happened to her. I've not been able to trace it.
well, sadly she's passed.
No, I had a feeling she might have.
Jane had a wonderful gift as a songwriter. Her parents were officers and they traveled a lot. They were territorial evangelists. She would sit down in the loneliness of a Sunday evening. She'd sit down at the piano and put the songbook in front of her. And she handed me one day 3 cassette tapes full of songs that she just made up sitting at the piano. And I found that one and The Savior's Name and another one, Jesus Thou Art Everything, are all
Oh,
Jane Clark
golly,
songs.
yes.
And those two, Savior's Name and Jesus Thou Art Everything, are just hits. They're solid gold. And the fact that I, arranged them so that our
Yeah,
singers could sing them and you would have a piano part. But no, she was a great tunesmith. And I've still got the cassettes, and I have a cassette player, and I've gone back to it many times for ideas. Yeah.
yeah. I'm sure that we played a band arrangement of that sometime. I'll have to try and dig it out again. But
It has been arranged. It
yeah,
has been arranged by somebody for brass band. Yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to remember, because I remember I think it's in the old Grey book, favourites book, and there was a bunch of us going, "This is an old singing company piece." And it's
Yeah.
one of those few songs that when I see the words of, that's the tune I automatically think of. And I had to physically say, hang on a minute, that tune, what's that? And I realised, like we had this morning on the radio, obviously, "Oh God of Burning Cleansing Flame," the modern version is the one I associated. And of course, I do remember the original Tucker. I kind of have, I think being born and bred in the
You wouldn't want
army,
to sing it.
yeah.
You wouldn't want to sing it.
Yeah, but then if someone sings "Oh God," I think, "Oh, that's the one." But I think because, like yourself, you've been so engrossed in the music, sometimes I have to take a step back. Oh, that's the songster version, is it? That's the one I've been singing for the last 30 years. I'm so used to hearing the songster version because that was the one that was popular. And half of these are your arrangements. I was like, oh, that's another Len Ballantine, is it? Does he not do anything else apart from go to the toilet and plug these wonderful hit songs that the songs just keep pumping out? But obviously, you've said you've only just got into Sibelius. So is it still the case of pen and paper when you get an idea, or someone comes in and says, we want a song or a band arrangement? Because like many composers said, you can do it to perfection on it, and it's not until you play it out and that note sounds right. So hang on, that was perfect on the computer and it was perfectly in sync. And you kind of have to deconstruct this wonderful, perfect symphony on your computer. How does it work now? Is it still pen and paper, or what's the process?
Absolutely. It's still pen and paper. The imagination, going from the pencil and the paper and the short score, maybe 3 staffs. So you give yourself enough room to get some ideas down, and then to go to the computer and input and imagine the parts, the lines, and the colors. That is lovely. That's the best part. Having done the compositional work, which is fiddly, it's strained. Every note, every chord, you're praying to be guided. But once you're happy with that, to go to the computer and input and to see the colors emerge, that's joy. There's a lot of joy in that activity. So I try to separate those, and and not go to the computer too soon. Make sure I've got a lot of notes down before I start fiddling, because you can sit looking at the screen, making things look pretty, and you're really not advancing the cause very much.
Mm. How do you what was I going? When you're writing it, you've obviously got a discipline, and you have the tendency to go, you've got the idea through, and or it could explode into a full scale work, or you've got to try and keep it simple. And you're out walking the dogs. When you're trying to do that, how do you clean the musical palette? I mean, we have so much radio and sounds and music and adverts and TV and all the rest of it. So if you've had an idea, how do you make sure that there's nothing else in the brain, so you've got that tune and you can focus on what the Lord wants you to do with that tune? How do you clean the musical palette?
Going for a walk is a good way. Getting out of your chair, going for a walk. I've had more ideas come to me when I'm taking a shower. I think when you're in the shower and there's something symbolic about you being cleansed. Your mind isn't on anything unless you're thinking about going out the door and you got to get ready. Your mind might be on a business meeting or something, but when I'm in the shower, things often pop into my head. The way to work with a rhythm, or if I'm working with a text, a way to get the text to do what I need it to do. Now I have yet to take a shower on purpose because I feel stale, like I need a breakthrough. I think I'll go have a shower. I haven't quite done that, but I have gotten out of my chair and gone for a walk, take the dogs out, and the rhythm of walking, you find yourself walking in time with the music. It's inevitable because it's still in your head. You're playing the tape over and over in your head. And there's something really cleansing and therapeutic about that. Yeah. And you have to do it. Anybody who works at home and stares at a computer has to get up off the chair and breathe deep and do a little yoga, mind yoga, for sure.
I do remember reading, I think it was Peter Cook's biography of Eric Ball, that very late in life he had to start gardening and learning how to do something as simple as mowing a lawn. And he said in the last sort of 20 years, that process of going up and down, he said you could develop a sort of a 4/4 routine and be able to, hang on a minute, I can think of that symphony I need to write because I've got this pedestrianised kind of thing. So I think it's a very normal. So you don't have a mobile phone full of audio notes of you singing.
No.
What's the most unusual place you've ever had a message from about a piece of your music being performed?
A place where my music has been performed?
Yeah. We've got, I think, Romania, South Korea, Zimbabwe, and one of the islands off New Zealand has been the most surprising place. So where's the most surprising place you've had an email, text message?
I receive correspondence even yet from all over the world, not a lot. I receive correspondence and somebody will say, my mother was dying and we were playing your tape, my piano tape or a CD or something. And all the old tunes, all the old choruses are there. And because there wasn't words or singing or other things, it was just the piano. I have had that more than once. So I would say around the deathbed of many Salvationists all over the world. And I sometimes hear from fellow officers who have been stationed overseas. Somebody will be in South Africa, and the only little bit of Canada they've got is on a cassette or a CD, and they'll write and say, we were listening to this and it blessed us, and thank you very much. So that would be my story.
Brilliant. I would like to ask you a little bit, because I think it would be impossible not to, about your relationship with the Canadian Staff Songsters. Now, as anybody who's watched this, and as you will be aware, I had a very in-depth conversation with Donna, who I've known for many years, about how she became involved in it. How did the conception come to you as a leader and being involved in being part of the Canadian Staff Songsters from your point of view? How did your story involve in it?
Uh, this was not the first time that we thought about the possibility. It's been many, many years in coming. Um, Brian Burdett put a proposal together when he was the music secretary. I looked at it seriously when I was the music secretary in Canada. And there was a staff songster section in the early 1900s, but of course it was just ladies because that was the style in those days. And it was a proper staff section with the ladies that worked at THQ. But it stopped at the First World War because there was other things that needed
Mhm.
doing. Our group came about really because the music department here was reconfigured under a lay leader, Craig Lewis, and
Yeah.
he spent a year doing the background, getting the budgets, making the proposals. Um, they knew that they were going to give me that assignment, but and I had nothing to do with sort of the year of getting ready. Um, we didn't know until June when they announced it at the Congress that it was going to happen, and by September we had auditions and it got going that way. And you only get a chance to start something once.
Mhm.
So we wanted to make sure that the people we had were really solid, who were good Salvationists, people with strong conviction about their faith. And I connected with a number of people and said, "Why don't you audition? I think this would be really, really good if it could work." And some people came out of the woodwork that I didn't know about. And being as old as I am, I knew a lot of people. So um, people like Donna, so valuable. She's so talented and a great singer. Um, we're very fortunate. We've got a really solid group, and it's a warmer group in terms of tone than the ISS. In Britain, there's a lady's tone that is very pure, and I think it comes from the choral singing of your culture. And our sound is a warmer sound, a darker sound, more easily malleable for gospel music and that kind of stuff. We can really pull off because of the warmth and the fatness of the quality of the sound. So it's a much different kind of group in that sense, just from sound alone,
Mm.
uh, than the ISS.
Yeah. What kind of lessons did you have to learn from coming from being the part of the group as a singer or a player to actually being in front of the group and having to wave the baton, whether it's in front of the band or the songsters? Because it's, you've got at the end of the day, you're the one responsible for making sure that the band can work and the songsters can work in an effective unit. Whereas if you're on the altos, you've only just got to work out what the altos or the tenor, your particular part of the band. What was the difference like for you? What was the learning curve for you?
Well, with singing, I sang in the concert choir at university, and I sat there with my mouth open, amazed at what this guy was doing. Uh, And I wanted to do it. I wanted to do that so bad. I just saw it working, and and that was it. In terms of there's a certain distance that you need to take as a leader. You're listening all the time. Your antenna is always up, um, and you back away from what it means to sing a particular part, and you're listening to the whole thing, and you want to make a musical comment that will make sense to everybody.
Mhm.
Say one thing that's going to make a difference right at this moment for this choir for that phrase. And I try not to stop the group ever unless I've got something to say. And sometimes I'm saying it before they're stopped. And I try to keep that kind of pace in the rehearsing. So there's always something that's a demand that's being made.
Mhm.
Um, if there's a mistake that I see being made by leaders, is that there's long speeches made about wonderful things, and then they'll sing it again from the beginning instead of hitting something really important that might change the impact of the whole thing if they could just nail that one thing
Yeah. Who
real
are the
specific.
Who are the composers that you enjoy listening to and playing as a performer? If you get the chance to see if a choir, another songster brigade is singing or another band is playing, and you think, I know that guy, I enjoy that music. Are there any names that you particularly in the Salvation Army context enjoy hearing and listening to?
Absolutely. Well, of course, growing up and listening to Ray Seminole and Les Condon, Eric Ball, those are the people who were instructing my ears. And whatever goes in never comes out. I mean, once you've heard a thing, you can't unhear it.
Yep.
So if you're going to learn a musical cliche, you better learn it from Eric Ball or RSA. And I think that's what people my age did. They listened to those scores and looked at them and tried to figure out what was going on. In the modern age, you've got wonderful, wonderful writers. Ken Downey, his color, amazing. Robert Redhead, color taught me so much, just hearing it, watching it, looking at, and saying to myself, what is that sounds so good? Why is that moment what it is? Andrew Wainwright is has really, you better watch that page. That's a page that is going to do big time.
Yeah.
And there are lots of other people that are not going to do well, but I've been very impressed by what I've heard of his. There's everybody that writes now seems to have a very keen interest in the way that percussion elevates their music, and the more drums and toys we can have going, the better. And I think the
This comes from
percussion.
the guy who wrote St. Jesus and Brazil 75.
Yeah, you can do that with one drummer. You don't need four.
I'd like to see St. Jesus done with one drummer. Mind you, you are doing it for Brazil, and Brazilians are known for their love of percussion and stuff. So,
right,
yeah. Favorite Salvation Army song? Do you have one currently? Because it probably changes every day now.
Famous Salvation Army song. There's one in the tune book that was a songster piece, and is it Les Conan? A Song of Praise.
Yeah, Eternal. Yeah, Eternal God, our song of praise to you. Yeah.
Marvelous tune. There was we retired the songster leader from York Minster Citadel, where I was a corps officer for the last 9 years of my career. We retired her last season, and I was in charge of the Sunday morning meeting, and I pulled out a song of praise. The band played it. Nobody knew it. Nobody knew it. And I was so frustrated. I was standing in the pulpit. The hall is full of people all giving, thanks for this life that had been so instrumental in vocal music at the York Minster Corps. Nobody knew the song. I was so disappointed. So it has to be done. I mean, you've got to do these things. You've got to do these things to keep them alive. And that's where the ministry of the slides and the pictures on the wall and the new thing, where we do lose touch with some of the great tunes and words that have come from our past.
Are you a fan of overheads in the music, or would you prefer not to? Because I've been to some concerts where they've played some really old classics, and if it hadn't been for the fact they had them on the wall, I wouldn't know Eric Ball had written that into Song of Courage. Somebody had the patience to go back to the gems and put the words on the screen, so you can say that's what he was talking about. Because when you get the Len Ballantines and the Ray Seminole, you just had the four walls and you had the band, and the band had the full weight to go back to the old wells. And what's that funny thing going? Oh, it's an old Salvation Army chorus. Whereas now we've got the availability. Do you find that helps as a composer?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the thing that has been lacking from our tradition up until present time, when so many corps really have invested in proper projection. And it can be tricky too, because there's so much light on a Sunday morning. You sometimes can't get a great signal on the wall. But now we have this ability to drop these words in right at the appropriate moment, and you've got people sitting behind the computer that otherwise wouldn't have ministry. They're not in the band. They're not in the, so they have a very useful ministry, working out slides and making sure that happens at the right time.
Yeah.
If they can,
I have to confess, I am that person. When Woolwich Band ceased to function and through retirement and so forth, the corps officer brought a projector, and I instinctively thought, oh, we can have overheads, we can put PowerPoints up. And that evolved into what we have. And I really, the band restarted with a few people. And I said, I just want to get back to playing hymn tunes as a drummer. The bass drum was upstairs, the one I learned on. The corps officer was perfectly happy for me to do so. And I said, I really need an answer prayer. And we had this couple come in. She was a cornet player. She became a part of the band, became a soldier. He's an adherent. And he said, Morvin, if you ever want help on the laptop, don't volunteer to do that. And I said, look, when the band are playing hymn tunes, can you do that? He said, not a problem. And so we divvy it up. So I can sit there and I can play songs to songs and band arrangements during the collection. And then for the tunes I can join into, because obviously not every tune needs a percussionist on it, I can go and join in the band and leave the technical bench. And I do remember we had a wonderful meeting a few weeks ago before the lockdown. And I think it was Barry Gott's version of What a Friend We Have in Jesus. I wasn't going to play it all the way through, but such was the effect of the people in about 50% of the congregation. It's like, moment by moment or stories of Jesus. You get a lot of people, keep singing it, keep going. We enjoy this. Oh, I'm reminded of this. I think the tunefulness is still there. And I think you're one of those composers that takes great passion and care to make sure that the tune is as important as the razzmatazz that maybe ask, can we have a razzmatazzy opener on St. Denio? Being as we are in this lockdown period, has that meant that your compositional skills and vocal and harmonization has been able to sow new fruit, or has it kind of been pressured down? And because no, that's a bit too, what's in the pipeline? Is there anything that we can look forward to in the next sort of year or so?
I'd like to know what everybody else has been saying when you ask that
It's hit
question.
and miss.
I find that without the load and without the requirement, I don't go to it. I'm not a compulsive writer, never have been. Mm-hmm. I write for a specific thing, specific purpose in a specific place in my head. And I never do anything that I know is not going to get performed. I only write when I'm asked to, or when I have a particular thing to do. So not having my choirs going and not having that outlet, I'm not seeing where the next time we're going to sing, it's been quite horrible because I'm not compulsive about going to the instrument and writing things down. So which says more about my character than I'd like it to, but that's I haven't done enough.
You rather write to a deadline, or if someone says we want a piece of music for then, and you can do that. You don't get a tune walking the dogs. I've got to get home and I've got to sort that out. And I've got to write it, even though it wouldn't necessarily have a deadline to it.
Yes, it's got to have a deadline, and it won't get done until 5 minutes before that. The longer you have, the worse it is.
Okay.
If you're a perfectionist, if you're waiting for the best idea you've got, it never comes. Whereas if you know that tomorrow you got to hand it in, you're going to put down something. And what you forget is that after 60 years of doing this stuff, you're going to make the right choice. I mean, why worry that it's going to be a foolish one? But you do. It's what you've always done. You wait and you think it'll be better if I just massage this some more. Yeah. So yeah, deadline's very important with me. I wrote jingles. I wrote jingles for about 5 years, and when I was writing a jingle, I was fine. But then go and get the next job was the difficult part. Well, I needed to. If I had been married to Heather at that moment in my life, I would have been fine, because she could have been a good business manager. She's just handed me a piece of paper. Remember to plug lenballantine.com.
Yeah,
If I'd been drinking her,
absolutely.
see,
Absolutely.
a jingle is for a particular place, a particular audience, a particular product, and you siphon all that down and out drops something that's got to work. And that's the way I approach all of my writing, even today.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that's got maybe two answers. I don't know. Your favorite, do you have a favorite Bible passage of scripture? But can you remember the scripture quote that's on your Salvation Army Officer Commission?
No, I do not. I couldn't tell you what I wrote. You're
So do you
catching me
have a
off guard.
favorite Bible quote?
Yeah, no. I love the Genesis stories.
Mm.
I think there's so much. I think it was with I was talking to the Songster Brigade from Cambridge just a few weeks ago, and we were talking about COVID times, and I read from Genesis about the creation of man and what God wanted to us to feel as His supreme
Mhm.
creation, and how we are part of a unique world altogether. And COVID has been bringing us back kicking and screaming to a sense of belonging on the same planet with each other. And so if I had to choose an area of scripture, it would definitely be that.
So apart from composing and listening to Salvation Army music, I mean, you said you like walking. What other passions are there in the Ballantine life? Reading, writing, skipping?
Uh, I do read. I'm on a Bill Bryson kick right now. He's a American British guy, kind of an amalgam, and he writes travelogues, crazy, funny travelogues about walking all across the British Isles or walking up the Appalachian Trail or being in the middle of an African desert. And he's very humorous. I enjoy that. I have long drives. We live 3 hours away from my songster rehearsal. So on a Wednesday, I drive down and then I drive back in the wee hours of the morning. So I listen. I have audio books that I listen to because I only listen to CBC radio, and when I can't get the signal, I gotta find something else. We like eating around here. My wife is a gourmet cook, and we love to
You just
enjoy
have another $10 bill under the table for the rights for that.
No, I'm still wearing my all of my COVID calories. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
When we get a go ahead for the Songsters, I'm going to have to go on a diet. Have you seen all the food pictures people are sending around
Oh,
these days? They're sitting at home making wonderful things to eat. Nobody's going to fit in their tunic.
this has got absolutely nothing to do with this conversation. I had an almost identical conversation with a friend of mine from work on Friday afternoon. And I said for the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks, I think everyone was queuing up to get the fruit and the veg and the different concoctions to make all these wonderful meals and the things that you can get in the cooking magazines and the cooking shows. And then a friend of mine about 3 weeks ago just said, "Oh, my wife's so busy. She's working in a kebab shop." I went, "What's she doing in the kebab shop?" "They're absolutely run off their feet because everyone's ordering kebab. They've just opened back up." I went, "You can say, because my mother loves a good kebab. So every Saturday night, we order a kebab in because it saves us having to go out to the shop and get in, because we're so bored of cooking at home that we can get kebabs, pizzas, fish and chips.
Yeah.
McDonald's has just opened back up so we can do burgers, and we can go and get it quite safely. So the stomach's going down a bit. But, if you're lucky to have a gourmet cook, then that goes some way. Well, I'm going to have to call this quits because it's getting late for me here, but I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to spend time with you, learn the stories behind some of these wonderful pieces, and just say hello again and hear your story of music and family and inspiration. I would like to pray with you to finish with. I will leave it up to you if you want to dance around the room, close your eyes, stand upside down, entirely up to you. Dear Lord, the gift of composition, the gift of laughter, the gift of music is something that could only have come from you, Lord. And I thank you for Len's willingness to embrace the facets of music that he has been given, and that he is so keen to follow your mission for his life, and that his family, his friends, his core workers and comrades have all benefited from the blessings that you have bestowed through his gift of piano, teaching, mentoring, friendship across the globe, Lord. So many people have heard a Len Ballantine piece. It's sometimes hard not to. And we thank you, Lord, for the ministry and the Christian witness that is so evident in Len himself, in his music and his output. I just want to pray for him now, Lord. I thank him for his time, his talent, his willingness to be involved in this crazy thing that we've got going on here. But it's all because of you, Lord. Well, as the music says, as we come back to the heart of worship, it's because you're at the centre, Lord. You're at the centre of his life, his music, and he strives to hold that standard so high to make sure that you are glorified and to God be the glory. I just want to ask for your blessings on him now and his family, particularly in this difficult time. For the Canadian staff songsters, as songsters and musicians in their own core are very acutely aware of this prestigious honour of representing the territory and the trials and the tribulations and the hardships that they so willingly do to make sure that they can glorify you and just be the best that they can be. I pray for Donna and her family, and I just thank you, Lord, that you utilising her in the way. And I just pray for the continued success of the Canadian staff songsters, the Canadian staff band and the musicians and the people. And I pray especially for Len as he continues to serve you, to worship you, and just to continue writing and to get the inspiration that he seeks, knowing you are there to help and guide him. In your name I pray, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Bless you, Morgan. Lovely. Thank you for that affirmation.